Denver Broncos have interviewed Jim Harbaugh for their head coaching position. Plus, Ejiro Evero is getting the first dibs in person. What's to make of the Broncos' decisions and also who else they have left to interview? We'll dive into that. And we're also going to talk about which four free agents should the Denver Broncos absolutely bring back in 2023. You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this show free and available everywhere you get your podcast, where you can watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button if you love daily Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more, because we are the place for you. And even though we're in the offseason, for the true fan, there is never an offseason. From the south stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host and good friend, Sayre Bedinger, Sayre expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, my friend, as we talked about in yesterday's episode of the show, coming off of a victory Monday, the aftermath of the Broncos' season-closing win against the Chargers, the head coaching search heats up, and so what Broncos country can expect is all the latest developments for the Broncos coaching search, and you know what? On Monday, they kicked things off in a big way. As we found out, they interviewed Jim Harbaugh over the internet, right, over a Zoom call for their vacant head coaching job at this point in time. The search is heating up, my friend, and on Tuesday, they interviewed Ejiro Evero in-house. He's also got some interest from the Houston Texans. Let's talk about the coaching search, my friend, because it's going to continue to heat up over the next couple of weeks.
Well, it is, and I think obviously seeing Jim Harbaugh as the first official interview, right? I know that the owners have spoken to Sean Payton, but that was not a formal interview. That can't happen actually until next week. So per the NFL rules and based on guys that are under contract with certain teams and things like that, actually the Broncos can't interview a number of these guys until next week. So for anybody that's listening, that's wondering, well, why, Raheem Morris, he's a candidate. Why can't they interview him already? Well, that's just the way the NFL works, right? So they have to, kind of play the game and they have to do things by the book. So they've requested interviews with certain guys, but Jim Harbaugh, he's not an NFL coach right now. He's coaching at Michigan. So they can interview him. They can talk to him. And the fact that the Broncos got an audience with Jim Harbaugh, Cody, should not be lost on anybody. If anything else, it ramps up the search from a variety of perspectives. Jim Harbaugh is probably perceived from the outside looking in as one of the best potential head coach candidates. You look at the landscape of this year's cycle and things like that, at least if you're considering coaches that are retreads or, they would be on their second time being a head coach or more. Jim Harbaugh's got to be up there, right, among the top candidates. So you look at that as another prospective candidate and you're saying, well, I've got to follow up Jim Harbaugh. And that's the job of Ejiro Evero, as you mentioned, on Tuesday, as he interviewed with the Broncos ownership group and George Payton. Of course, they know Ejiro Evero very well, but certainly as far as this head coach search is going, things are heating up. Things are ramping up. The Broncos can't officially interview all these candidates until starting next week. Guys like Dan Quinn, Raheem Morris, Sean Payton. We'll see if he gets an official interview there with the Broncos. We know that these candidates, they will get talked to. D'Amico Ryans as well in there. But Cody, right now, the first official interviews going to Jim Harbaugh and Ejiro Evero. And you know what? It's interesting. They were on the same staff together back with the 49ers once upon a time.
Yeah, they were. And I think as well, for a guy like Ejiro Evero, I don't think many people view it as like, oh, this guy interviewed first. Okay, well, now I have to knock it out of the park. I think Ejiro Evero is going to be completely himself. And I think the comfortability he already has being in that building every single day, I think is going to be a benefit for him. But I also think for the Walton Penner family ownership group and obviously the interview panel that is leading this head coaching search, for Harbaugh, now you get an idea as to some of the things you want to ask the other candidates, right? Or maybe you can expand upon some things, when you're going through the process. And as you mentioned, I believe it's for coordinators, the 18th of January is when they can start interviewing coordinators. The Broncos have already submitted these requests to interview, which obviously, teams have granted permission, but they cannot do it until the 18th. Part of me is also wondering, why? Why the 17th? Why the 18th? Why did the NFL rule that has to be the protocol there. I mean, I understand that you have some teams that are in the playoffs, right? But in my opinion, if you are, let's say, the Dallas Cowboys, you play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday. Let's say you get eliminated. Why can't you just interview right after that team has been eliminated? To me, I think there's a larger prospect there. I know NFL PR guy Brian McCarthy put something out explaining why the NFL has these rules in place. It's weird, but you know what? Can't question the NFL. They do things and they operate by a different set of rules than we do in our day-to-day lives. But I think ultimately I'm interested in seeing how Evero does. I'm eager to hear, or if we are going to hear, like how well he interviewed. I know we're going to probably hear a little bit from Mike Kliss probably in the coming days about that. I would say, like, while everybody is zeroed in on Jim Harbaugh, my sleeper and the guy that I feel like, with all the big names that have been listed, I think Ejiro Evero does have a really good chance of making a strong case to be the next head coach. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe he stays on another year. Even if he doesn't get the head coaching job, Sayre, I would love to see him stay on as the defensive coordinator because then it'll continue to help him build up stock. But in your opinion, if you're bringing in a new head coach, right, and let's say it's not Ejiro Evero, I mean, do you agree, like, should the Broncos keep Evero? I mean, or should the next coach keep Evero? Or do you think they'll bring in their own defensive coordinator? To me, I feel like it would be absolutely foolish to tear apart and to tear down what Evero has built defensively with this Broncos team and with the players on it. I feel like ripping that apart to bring in somebody new with a new scheme, I think would just, why? It wouldn't make sense to me. That is something I fear for with this team.
I completely agree with you on that, and I think there's a multitude of reasons why Ejiro Evero should be kept around. If he's not going to be the head coach, Cody, definitely as the defensive coordinator. Obviously, your defense, with all its changing parts in 2022, was one of the best in the NFL, and he proved exactly what he said when he was first hired, right? He's going to find a way to bring pressure, and they did it in different ways, right? Dre'Mont Jones led the team with 6.5 sacks. It wasn't like the Broncos were racking up sacks every single week, but we saw the turnover numbers dramatically increase near the end of the season. That's because they're bringing pressure. They're finding creative ways to do it. So I think he did his job out there. And, you look at some of these things, and I just want to quickly say, Cody, we get a number of comments in the YouTube section, the YouTube comment section. You get people saying this on Twitter all the time, and I think it needs to be addressed. Ejiro Evero is not being interviewed as some token, it's not just to appease the Rooney Rule, and it does do that. But at the same time, look, Ejiro Evero is getting interviewed. Raheem Morris, DeMeco Ryans. The Broncos could end up hiring one of those guys because they might be the best candidate here, right? So people need to stop thinking that they're just getting interviewed as a way to satisfy the Rooney Rule. These are truly some of the best assistant coaches in the NFL. They're very highly respected. And like you said, Ejiro Evero, especially so in the Broncos front office. I think if the Broncos don't end up hiring him as the head coach, you keep him as the defensive coordinator because he is going to be a head coach down the line. And if the Broncos need him on the staff for 2 seasons in order to, the NFL has the new rule where a minority candidate gets hired elsewhere, your team, for whatever reason, it's not both teams, but your team would get multiple third-round picks. It would help the Broncos dramatically if they say, you know what, we've decided DeMeco Ryans is the top guy for the job, or we've decided Sean Payton or Jim Harbaugh, et cetera, but we want to keep Ejiro around and give him the opportunity to shine on this staff as well. Then he goes and gets a head coach job in 2024. You get third-round picks coming back. It's a win-win situation to have him back on the Broncos. But again, it's not just to satisfy the Rooney Rule. People need to stop talking like that because Ejiro Evero is a great coach. He has worked his way from being a defensive assistant, assistant DB's coach, and all these different things that he's worked his way up into being a defensive play caller. And look at the progress that he made as a defensive play caller, player development, just the way that we listen to him at his press conferences week to week. Cody, I'm sure your personal interactions with him and his players as well. The fact of players speak to Josie Jewell saying this is the most fun I've ever had. Players that want to play for him, players that he's getting the best out of them. To diminish his candidacy as the head coach, I think is completely wrong. And I think that people need to shift their perspective on that a little bit.
100%. And you can just tell who parrots certain talking points that we hear from places that are really not there. Like there are so many places that say these certain things, and you can just tell based on certain comments that, they've listened to this person or this outlet or station because they said this. But the reality is it's just uninformed, low-hanging fruit talking points. And I think that's spot on what you said here about Evero, Ryans, and even Raheem Morris at this standpoint. And Broncos country, as we know, the head coaching search will heat up over the next couple of weeks. We could expect progress maybe mid to the end of next week. We'll have you covered here on Locked On Broncos. But on today's episode of the show, we're going to talk about which 4 Broncos free agents the team absolutely 100% must keep going into next year. You get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes, and they can file for you so you can do not taxes. You can show your eyes things that are not taxes. You can unpack a moving box that are not taxes, and you can taste not taxes. You can sing not taxes a lullaby, or hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. It feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax. Full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. And our good friends over there at the Ultimate Football GM. And if you've ever wanted to be a general manager of an NFL team, well, now you have the opportunity to do just that, all from the palm of your hand. Your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You get to manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're going to be responsible for, as the GM, hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go, as you want, and when you want to. Locked On Broncos listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. All right, Sayre, continue on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Free agency is approaching us in just about a month and a half. You can maybe make the argument almost 2 months here from the standpoint. One of the things I look at, especially with their 18 unrestricted free agents, I mean, there's so many guys that are, were on 1-year deals or, 2-year deals that are now expiring. With a brand new head coach coming in, Sayre, Denver's going to have to make some changes. And they're also going to have to make some, I would say like advisements in a sense on who to bring back. Now, the new head coach will be in place by the time free agency approaches, but I think people need to understand George Paton, from a football standpoint, from football personnel, he will consult and he'll collaborate with coaches, but he has the final say in football personnel. Like, so many people think, oh, George Paton's, since he's not leading the head coach search, he has no power. If George Paton truly had no power or influence, he wouldn't be the general manager of the Broncos. They would have fired him. So I think that we have to try to kill some of these narratives that are a little off base here. George Paton still has plenty of influence, plenty of power, and especially when it comes to football personnel, he has all the say at the end of the day, and that's something that the Walton Penner family ownership group trusts him with. Now, you and I, we're going to choose 4 players in totality that the Broncos need to bring back in 2023. Let's start things off with probably the biggest free agent for the Broncos this offseason. That is Dre'Mont Jones. And Sayre, we mentioned, the sacks, but I think the thing that stands out, so many people look at sacks, right? Sacks are important, but I think quarterback pressures are absolutely important as well. For him, I believe he had 16, 17 pressures in the amount of games that he played. Now, granted, he missed the last remaining games of the season due to the hip injury. He is a truly dominant player on the interior. And look, if Denver's not going to pay him to come back, I guarantee you he's going to get big-time money on the free agency market from some other team. In my opinion, he is priority number 1A. There's a 1B that I have we'll get to later.
He is priority 1A, Cody. If nothing else, I think he's the premier free agent on the roster right now. If he hits free agency, it would be one of those situations where there'll be a bidding war to get him from, all the teams in Florida. As we always know, they show up every year around free agency, as well as some of the best teams in the NFL. I think they would look to Dre'Mont Jones, not just the bad teams that are trying to spend a bunch of money, but I think also the really good teams in the NFL that would see him as the missing piece, right, for the interior of their defensive line, like we saw the Buffalo Bills do last year with a couple moves they made. So I think he'll be a highly coveted player one way or the other, which means that the Broncos are going to have to pony up the cash. And there's no doubt that they should do that, Cody. Defensive line is not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's like the strongest area of the team in terms of looking towards the future at the roster. I mean, Dre'Mont Jones isn't even the only free agent on the defensive line starting wise. You know, Deshaun Williams played over 50% of the snaps. He's a free agent as well. So you've got to find a way to bring back Dre'Mont Jones, even after signing DJ Jones in last year's free agent period. Remember, the Broncos gave him 3 years, roughly $30 million. I think Dre'Mont Jones is going to command potentially close to double that. I mean, I hate to just throw things out there like that, but I mean, at 17 to 20 million a year is not out of the realm of possibility, which means the franchise tag is also not out of the realm of possibility.
And I know that the franchise tag, a lot of people are wondering how much it costs, and some people have estimated 17 to 19. I think it's like $20.1 million, if I'm not mistaken, which is, I mean, that's a lot of money. So this is probably going to be the hardest thing to try to figure out. Like, obviously, Dre'Mont said he and his agent, they're going to talk, and they're going to, figure out what the plan is. And obviously, his agent will be in contact with George Paton, and they'll kind of work from there. But yeah, he's a dominant player that you have to have. He is 1A. Sayre, is it a stretch to say that Alex Singleton is 1B priority to bring back for the Broncos? Obviously, last year in free agency, he signed a 1-year deal, and it was a move that you and I, at first, we sat here on the podcast, we're like, this was the move that they made? I'm not quite sure this is the move that moves the needle. Obviously, you and I were both proven very, very wrong in this one. We're glad to be proven wrong on that. And getting to know Alex Singleton, I tell you what, man, he's fun. He is a fun dude to be around. He's funny. He's witty. And he honestly just plays with his hair on fire. He isn't I put a tweet out during the game. I was like, man, this guy is so fun to watch, man. Someone's like, I read this in John Gruden's voice when I tweeted that out. But for him, I think what we saw from him on special teams, I think the value we saw for him starting next to Josey Jewell, I mean, in my opinion, I think it's clear-cut that he is a top priority for the Broncos this offseason. And I do believe, and I feel George Paton feels the same way for him.
I think so too. I really do. And after how many consecutive 100-plus tackle seasons, right? How many times does he have to prove himself? I mean, he signed with the Broncos. This is one of the reasons why I personally didn't like the move. He signed with the Broncos for less money than you see a lot of day 3 draft picks get guaranteed on their contract. So it's kind of crazy the fact that he racked up 163 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 passes broken up, all the forced fumble that we saw against Kansas City. He did a lot of stuff for this Broncos team, more so than just, remember, he played all 17 games this year, but remember, like, the season started off with the Broncos are trying to shoehorn Jonas Griffith into the starting lineup. So this wasn't like Alex Singleton started all 17 games. He played 100% of the snaps. No, it was like a back and forth between, well, when Jonas is healthy, he's starting, and when he's not, or Josey Jewell missed time as well. So at times we saw Singleton and Griffith out there. I mean, there's so much that he brings to the table. It would be shocking to me, Cody, if he's not back with the Broncos. As well as things went, the marriage between the two parties this year, Singleton and Denver, it would be shocking to me if he's not back, especially because, as I know you can speak to as well, the relationship that he has with Josey Jewell, I think kind of makes these guys a bit of a, Bash Brothers type of duo at the linebacker position. And they like each other a lot, which I think that would make me, if it was me, I would want to work with that guy. I would want to work for those coaches. I would want to work in the organization where, they believed in me, they gave me a shot, and I thrived there.
Yeah, well, he and Josey and Justin Sternada, like those 3 guys, they hang out together. They go to Nuggets games together, sit courtside. I mean, they're attached at the hip. And every time they come out for like pregame warm-ups, before you put on your uniform one night, you come out in just like your normal casual team-issued wear. They're always together. They're always having fun. And these guys, you talk to them too, and they're like, man, it's great playing alongside this guy. Like, they have nothing but great things to say about one another. I feel like this is one move, and I know this is probably another idea, another episode we can do here on the show as we get through the offseason. I would be genuinely upset if the Broncos let Singleton go elsewhere. I genuinely would be upset at this if that were to happen. So we will see what happens. But Broncos country, there are 2 other players that Sayre and I have deemed as important for the Broncos to consider re-signing for the 2023 NFL season. Who is it and why? You get that on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. And Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. With the PrizePicks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. These players will have a projection that's set by PrizePicks, and you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their PrizePicks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up for an instant deposit match up to $100. 2 other players that we believe the Broncos absolutely 110% need to take a look at bringing back in the 2023 NFL season. That conversation continues on today's episode of Lockdown Broncos. Just want to say thank you so much and give a massive shout out to everybody in Broncos country. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day every single day. One thing we can guarantee is every single day, all year long, you'll have a brand new episode of Lockdown Broncos from Sayre and myself as we break down the latest in Dove Valley. I go to all the practices. I go to all the press conferences that we have. So if you have any questions, you want to know a little bit more, we try to bring you as close to the action as possible here, Lockdown Broncos. All right, Sayre, I feel like a lot of fans, I'm eager for fan responses on this, by the way, like who are their top 4 guys they feel like they should bring back in free agency. I feel like this guy also has a strong case, and I think he's demonstrated just how important he can be here. Massive shout out to Latavius Murray, who, in my opinion, maybe he comes in a little bit sooner. Maybe he, amasses over 1,000 yards. Maybe he gets going, but it's hard to project that considering where the Broncos offense was, knowing what we know now and how they really just had a complex game plan that simply didn't pan out week in and week out. Latavius Murray was honestly a great addition, a great pickup by the Broncos during the season, and at the end of the year, we started seeing him really have success, and I'm here for bringing him back. He's a true pro. He's fun to be with in the locker room as well.
Well, the Broncos can't make the same mistake that they made in 2022. Look, as we evaluate George Paton since he came aboard in 2021, that position, we knew it was going to be important to him, right? Like he drafted Dalvin Cook, or he was part of drafting Dalvin Cook. He was part of drafting Adrian Peterson, all these different things. He saw the value of multiple really good running backs throughout his time in Minnesota. We knew that was going to be a priority. Then the Broncos, they saw Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon in 2021. You and I talked about this on the show. It was an abnormal situation for those 2 guys to play the majority of games in 2021 as they did. The Broncos were pretty healthy at running back, which is not normal in the NFL. So to bank on that going into 2022 was a mistake. To bring Melvin Gordon back after some of the struggles he had late in the 2021 season, a lot of people viewed that as a mistake. I felt like Melvin needed more respect from Broncos fans based on the fact he had 20 touchdowns in his first 2 years with the team and over 1,000 yards from scrimmage in those seasons. And he was kind of one of the only guys producing on offense. But at the same time, we saw his habits, the bad habits, rear their ugly head. Latavius Murray came in and he provided stability. What was the number one thing that we needed when the Broncos picked up Latavius Murray? Ball security. And he brought that all season. And more so than that, it wasn't just like he was going out there getting 40 yards a game, averaging 3.5 yards a carry, really just kind of being a boring player at the position. He had multiple 100-yard games. He brought the team 6 touchdowns, and he was very, very good down the stretch. I mean, with all due respect to him, he's certainly not a Christian McCaffrey out there in terms of his ability out in space, right? But I think we even saw some improvement in his explosiveness as the season went along. He showed on a couple of plays down the stretch that when he gets that second and third gear, I mean, who wants to step in front of 6'3", 230 downfield like that? So he's a big player. I think he's an important veteran to bring back. Well,
and I think for Javonte, I think Broncos fans should have this realistic expectation. Don't put any expectations on Javonte, right? Because Javonte is going to be coming off of a major knee injury, and you can't just come in and say, okay, well, hey, Javonte, it's been a year, or not even that. It's not even going to be a year since it happened. By the time the season comes around, it's going to be under a year. So it's for me, I would not be shocked if Javonte starts the year off next year on the PUP list, which isn't a bad thing, right? Let Javonte get as comfortable as he needs to be who he is as a running back, right? And it's going to take some time. I think that having a guy like Chase Edmonds, who's still under contract with the Broncos next year, I think that's huge. I think Latavius Murray, you bring him back, not only just as a veteran presence, but he's reliable and he can produce for you in the right scheme, as we saw in the last couple of weeks of the season and periodically throughout the year since he's been a member of the Broncos. And look, hey, you have another guy that can maybe be on the practice squad, and Tyler Beatty, who scored his first career NFL touchdown this past week. He and I had the same professor at Mizzou, which was a really cool thing. Him and I bonded over. So that was a really cool moment to see for him in the game on Sunday against the Chargers. Let's talk about the next guy here, right? Because everyone, I think, is so fixated on the Broncos. Like, there's an opportunity or a possibility. Denver trades their first-round pick. It's going to be a late round one pick. Wherever the 49ers finish, that's where the Broncos are going to have that pick at, right? That could be going to the Saints potentially for Sean Payton. If Sean Payton is the guy for the job, the Broncos could use it on another position. And obviously the top two offensive tackles, that you particularly want, maybe at right tackle, probably aren't going to be there when Denver is on the clock. So I think a bigger question that we have to ask here is, what do the Broncos do at right tackle, which leads us to Billy Turner. Now, he didn't come into the season, obviously in training camp, he had a knee surgery and whatnot. He didn't come into the season fully healthy. He suffered the knee injury against Tennessee, and obviously that pulled him out of action a little bit, and he was able to come back in. Are you on board or opposed to bringing him back on a one-year deal? Kind of like a prove-it deal in a sense, but also with an eye on the future. Let's say you draft an offensive tackle that you can develop a right tackle behind him for the next year or so. I mean, I'm not opposed to that. To me, I think that's my preferred option for the Broncos at this point in time, because I don't feel like you can go into an NFL season with a rookie offensive tackle trying to protect Russell Wilson with Garrett Bowles coming off of a major leg injury and questions on the interior of the offensive line. I just don't know if the Broncos can risk that. Your thoughts?
No, you're absolutely right. You want that rookie, if that's the case, to come in and win that job against someone like Billy Turner. You don't want to. Remember the Broncos in 2017? They kind of left the left tackle position open. They said that Tyson Brilo was going to be the starter going into the 2017 NFL draft, and everybody's like, "Well, we know you're lying about that." And then they draft Garrett Bowles to be the day one starter, and over time, that did work out. But in the moment, not having any real competition for Garrett Bowles was a problem. They needed to have somebody to push him out there. That's not to say that, well, you draft someone in the first round, they should always have to earn their stripes. They should never be projected as starters. That's not what I'm saying. But you're right, Cody. It's a late first-round pick. If you even have it in the first place, you have to have players like Billy Turner on your roster that have started a lot of games in the NFL. That could help you right away. So I absolutely would be on board for that. The question is, did Billy Turner come back to Denver strictly because of Nathaniel Hackett? Remember, he talked about how good of friends they were. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, but at the same time, you wonder. So it'll be fascinating to see. Does the new coaching staff agree with maybe the personnel department thinking we should bring Billy back for another season, see if he can, take a healthy offseason and carry that momentum into the regular season and be a viable starting option for us this year. You obviously want to fix that position long term, but you can't just throw a draft pick at it and say, all right, there we go. We threw the draft pick at it. We're set. We made that mistake with, Dalton Reisner, Lloyd Cushenberry, just feeling like, okay, we threw the draft pick at the guys. That position is set for the next 10 years. Well, that hasn't proven to be the case, has it? So we need to find the long-term solution, but at the same time, have guys in place that can play for you that are proven options at that spot, because right now it's just too precious of a situation to bank on, hey, this rookie's going to come in and perform at a high level. You don't know that, so you have to have guys like Turner that can play.
Tristan Wirfs wasn't picked potentially 25th or 31st because obviously there's no 32nd pick because the Dolphins had to forfeit theirs due to tampering and involving Sean Payton, Tom Brady. Obviously, there's something to keep an eye on there. But, I think you have to be very smart with your approach here. And, hey, look, Sayre, I'm putting it out there. Do not be surprised, Broncos country, if Denver makes a push to bring Mike Munchak back as their next offensive line coach, regardless of who is the head coach. That could be something. He's still living in Denver, by the way. It could be something to keep an eye on. So you heard it here, Locked On Broncos. But Broncos country, we want to know your thoughts. Who are the top 4 free agents that are set to be unrestricted free agents that you believe the Broncos absolutely need to bring back this offseason? If you're watching on YouTube, comment down below. If you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform, tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. We're eager for your thoughts and your responses. But one thing is for certain, Sayre Bedinger and myself, we will be back for a brand new episode of the podcast tomorrow on your favorite audio podcasting platforms or whether you watch on YouTube.